Welcome everyone to Tech in 20. Today we're going to be talking about VDI, Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, and looking forward to that. We have one of our experts, Alan Andersen, on the line with us today, who's going to run the presentation. And as you can see, we have our live polling available, so you can poll your answer or text your answers to 22333 if you're in the U.S., or you can use a browser anywhere in the world, any type of browser, smartphone, etc., and put in your choices there. We look forward to this, and so without further ado, we're going to turn the time over to Alan and learn about VDI.
Thank you very much, Clayton, and thanks for having me. So I've actually been focusing a lot on VDI over the last couple of years, so I hope that I can give you sort of in a quick, roundabout way a lot about the technology and what's interesting, what's happening right now. So feel free to have some questions ready at the end, and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. We had a live poll here which shows that a very high percentage of you guys actually with your customers have some sort of a VDI deployment, whether it is small scale like pilots or POCs, but actually has started becoming relatively big for some of these customers. And also there's about 1/3 of the respondents who said that they don't have VDI yet. Well, if we look at the market and what's really happening, it is growing quite rapidly. I put one of my favorite quotes here from Rachel Chambers, who's from 451 Group, who's one of the industry analysts that are covering this area. And she had it about 12 months ago, so it was in the beginning of 2012. She said that this year will be the year of VDI. And then afterwards she said for the 5th year in a row, because we had gone through and said 2009 was the year of VDI, 2010, 2011, and so forth. And it hadn't really materialized yet. There wasn't the large adoption as people expected to see in the beginning of the year. However, 2012 actually did see significant growth in VDI deployments. And a lot of it, as I mentioned here, was driven by bring your own device, bring your own Mac, as well as mobility, where people wanted to be more agile and mobile with computing and user computing. So that has helped drive the demand for this. And it's interesting because when I see your answers here, is that there's about 25% that are only using VDI, and there's a little bit higher percentage that want VDI. But then there's probably a little bit less than half that do not want VDI, and I understand that most of you guys are traveling, so that makes an awful lot of sense. Because the VDI use case is still not very good, although it is doable on mobile systems and disconnected systems. It really is not probably the right technology for that in most cases. I'm actually using a VDI now to deliver this presentation. I have a MacBook, and the active content in this presentation don't lend itself well to PowerPoint on a Mac. So it is going to be used by many different people in different circumstances, but there are also some challenges that we want to get into here in some of the next things. To get off right from the bat, VDI and desktop virtualization is not the same as server virtualization. True, some of the technologies are used, like hypervisors and so forth, but fundamentally it is very, very different. What's really cool about VDI is that it helps people with the distributed management challenges, so patching, backup, migration, antivirus deployment, software deployment, etc. But it then opens up some new challenges, more about the overall performance management, capacity management, fault management, and so forth, because of some of the increased complexity that we'll talk a little bit about later. But it does give a lot of benefits around those use cases. Most of them are related to either security or agility or simplicity. So security, because most of your data is now kept in the data center, you don't need to have a lot of worries about data leaking out by somebody leaving their laptop or their iPad somewhere where they shouldn't have left it. And also the agility and accessibility is very critical. One of the customers that I've spoken with is in insurance, and they run in a in a county that also has a very large military base. Because of that, many of their employees are actually spouses of military people, and they move around. So they may move every 2 years or every 5 years, and so all the training they have given these people, they don't want to see that walking out the door. So all of these people now have a VDI, and then whenever they move to, they just connect up and they can continue to use their VDI from their home PC. So that's a huge benefit from them from an agility and accessibility perspective. It's also simple. It's simpler in many ways from managing images and deploying applications. You can do many of the things centrally, so that can drive a lot of standardization efforts and really drive down OpEx in the long term. Now, these 3 C's of VDI, that's also on the screen here, is what the analysts usually say is some of the hindrance to adoption. And it's CapEx. It is more expensive. It's complexity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then it's connectivity, and that's what you guys mentioned about you guys probably being on the road and don't want the VDI. Now, CapEx, the formula for that is getting much better. It is getting less pricey to do these things, but it's not on the upfront investment is still more expensive. So that's just to sort of be aware of those types of things, that there are still some concerns. And I mentioned complexity a couple of times. And so what do I really mean with that? Well, there are lots of moving parts in a VDI implementation. There's a diagram here, which is from a Citrix and Desktop deployment, relatively simple actually, but there's a lot of moving pieces that all have to correlate and be up and running at the same time and perform very well. There are obviously the hypervisors that are hosting the virtual desktop. There are connection brokers that are sitting as the sort of the switchboard and connecting users with VDI resources. There's image provisioning systems that then spin up the images so that they're ready when the users come in. And then you have connecting the end users with the virtual desktops. You have remote display protocols, and they're not your simple to just configure one time and then it works. These now have a lot of different settings and a lot of different capabilities, because now USB has to be redirected over this protocol, sound and active images, et cetera, like video and so forth, all has to go over this protocol. And so those get configured in a very sort of defined way so that it fits the use case for the end users. You have all sorts of other services involved as well. Profile servers, if you want to provide people the ability to have their own personality in the system. Web servers for login, licensing servers. And then most of the VDI deployments also make use of existing technologies for application streaming or application virtualization to simplify the applications that are being used in the environment, so that you don't necessarily have to install all of them in the images, but can actually separate those out as well. And then storage, probably the most expensive thing of a VDI system these days. So there's a lot of innovative solutions that have been released that helps customers dealing with those challenges there. And then network optimization solutions, if you have remote connected people from different places in the world need to access the same centralized system. Some of those systems are probably also in place today. And this is not even all. There are many other components that need to be in play in order to deliver a VDI infrastructure. So those are some of these complexities that people are seeing in the area. Now, I kind of created a blog a while back that I call VDI I Like Kids, because they change everything. And by that, I don't mean that VDI is adolescent or not behaving well. It's not that type of kids, very well-behaved kids. But they do change a lot of things for the parents. And so when you look at some of the things that we do around traditional desktop management, we manage images. And now these images have to be optimized for VDI. So you have to switch off a lot of different things inside of the VDIs. So for instance, it doesn't need many of the drivers that are normally found. It doesn't need a background screensaver, for instance, and so forth. So you need to optimize some of those. You may also look into using profile or layering solutions to separate out the OS from the applications, from the data, from the personality, and so forth. So there's very smart ways of doing that right now. And then you need to decide on which type of images or VDIs you actually want to deliver. Are they persistent? So it's a one-to-one match between a user and a VDI, and they have their own, more like traditional desktops, only they're virtualized. Do you have floating VDIs that are it's like everybody gets the same type of VDI, and it probably gets thrown away after they've used it? Or do you use cloning technologies, which both VMware and Citrix have, to create smarter images and separate out pieces of the image and then refer back to that from a golden image? Those are various ways. Now, you also have shared desktops, which I hadn't mentioned here, but that's becoming interesting as well. Similar to how you have shared applications, you can also have shared desktops. So there's many options, many different ways of delivering VDI depending on the use cases. Software licensing, you need to pay attention to, or your customers need to pay attention to it. So it will probably surprise you that if you have a virtual desktop and you're accessing that from your own iPad, you actually require a license for that. If you're using it at home to go over your home network and access that VDI, that may be okay. But if you're using your own iPad in the office, it actually requires a license. Same thing about Microsoft Office. If your iPad accesses a virtual desktop that has Office, Office is a per device license, so now that iPad needs to be licensed to use Office as well. Even though you may have a ThinkTime sitting right next to it that is accessing exactly the same VDI, you still need a license. And there are many other complexities around licensing that people need to be aware of. Network traffic is changing, so you're going to care a lot more about latency for end users than you ever did before. Nobody cared if it took them like an extra minute to get the email, or maybe a browser loaded a little bit, it took a little bit longer to load. But now it's the full experience of the desktop that now can become choppy and so forth. So latency is what people really pay attention to. Traffic patterns change. So now no longer is the data actually going into the to the distributed network, going into the data center. So that changes. Now when you download a file or run a video, it's actually the traffic is redirected in there. And then the remoting protocols that I've talked about, you need to understand those and need to learn how to configure them and so forth. And then on the storage side, you're going to care a lot more about disk IOPS, and you're going to have to learn about reads and writes, because that's really critical with VDI. Capacity is almost like it doesn't even matter, because most of this is on a SAN. You can probably be around 6 to 8 users of VDIs per physical disk because of the issues with reads and writes. So you're going to have to look at those things when you configure a VDI network. So there has been a lot of, as I mentioned, storage optimization solutions that have come out, very innovative technology, very interesting, and it's definitely going to also change the OpEx and the cost benefit of VDI for the better. And so those solutions are already in the market now and trying to sort of win. So as you guys can see, there's been a lot of complexities around this. There's a lot of new technologies. There's a lot of moving parts. So what does this really mean for CA? Well, generally, from a CA perspective, the more complexity customers have to deal with, especially in the data center, the better it is for us, because that's what we do as a company very, very well. So we have monitoring solutions, we have automation solutions, we have security solutions that are specifically designed for these types of use cases, and especially in the data center. So we're really seeing a need for more and more sophisticated monitoring solutions especially, but also around automation and around security when people are starting to deploy these VDIs in larger volumes. So there's also a breaking point. You may still have a siloed approach if you only have a couple of hundred or so that are hidden over in a corner for a specific use case. But the issue is more when they start scaling it up. And there are customers now that have multitudes of tens of thousands of VDIs running. and are quite successful with some of those things. But they're paying very close attention to the overall monitoring aspect and the end user experience. And so over time, we don't expect VDI to really be standalone anymore. First of all, it will be integrated in the overall management paradigm of enterprise management as a whole, infrastructure management, application management, and so forth, and of course the security. But it shouldn't, because if it becomes an island, then people are just going to be shooting back and forth and arguing, no, it's the VDI's fault, and no, it's the network, no, it's the storage. Like, you really need a consolidated management approach to this area. And what I also find very interesting about VDI is, as we talked about in the beginning, it took a while before it started having some adoption. And I think 2012 was definitely a changing point in that. And one of the things that I've heard from some customers, which I found was very interesting, is that some customers now have a VDI first mentality. Remember that when that happened in the server world, where people used to say, well, we're not putting critical workloads on virtualized servers. Well, those days are long gone. But it all changed when some companies were saying that if you need a new server, by default it's going to be virtualized unless you can convince me otherwise. So that's what I call a VDI first mentality or policy. And that has now started to happen with some key customers that I have been speaking with. That's not for everybody. And the other thing that's happening is that around mobility, software as a service, VDI together with these technologies are really opening up a brand new way of dealing with end-user computing. And so from that perspective, it's going to be interesting to see some of the newer solutions coming out. It's going to be a lot more flexible. It's going to be very different than your traditional desktop. That doesn't mean that the traditional desktop and laptop are going to go away. It just means that there are now new options where people can deploy these and make life better for hopefully those users that are using them, or these administrators that have to administer them. Now, let me take a couple of the questions here. What's the value of BYOD to the end user if they can only use it to run a VDI sandbox? Well, many users, keep in mind, we're a technology company, so we always have people liking to tinker with things. But for many users, bring your own device is because they like to work on a Mac, for instance. They like that better. The company doesn't have a policy of buying Macs, but now people can bring their own. And so they also have a personal desire to have some of that technology. And I think that's what we're starting to see. Or if you go to the phone systems where people can choose their own phones, that's something that we've already started to see, where people choose to buy their iPhones or their Androids that they want to do. Seems that most VDI solutions are creating new challenges for service assurance, network, and application performance management. You're absolutely correct. That is some of the challenges. You're suddenly moving a lot of workloads into the data center, and workloads that were never really designed to be in the data center because the end user used to own that computing power. The storage that you got from a desktop is very inexpensive compared to what it is in the into the data center on the stand. And then finally, if you look at all the complexity, you're suddenly transferring sound and USB redirection, printer redirection, profiles. So there's a lot of things that are now changing the way that you have to manage these VDIs. But at the heart of it is monitoring solutions and performance management solutions. Can I use multiple monitors like I do normally? Absolutely. This technology has come a very, very long way in the last couple of years. You would not, this is not like old remote control technology. This is very advanced. They're very good. They can also now run with CAD/CAM applications. There are virtualized graphic processors that are going out there right now to help with some of those use cases. So there's a lot of hurdles that were previously there that are no longer actually in that space. So a lot of these hurdles have been removed. So you can do a lot of these things that you before used to do with a desktop. So let's go to the last slide here. In case, and I don't know if you have any comments, but one of the things that that I would like to end with this technology is that it is going to be in most of your customers. They are going to look at this. Not going to completely replace the desktops and the laptops that they have today. It has its uses. It's, as the British say, it's horses for courses. So you have different horses now that you can use for the different use cases that is all about end-use computing. So with that, Clayton, turning it back over to you for some potential questions.
Okay, thanks. And, you know, I think one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that, you know, as we look at this, it certainly is a technology that allows us to access things, you know, in a high mobility environment and in a high agility environment, you know, even when they have legacy applications. And, you know, the one comment there about, you know, JSON and HTML5 applications and so on, certainly there's a lot of companies that are going to do that, but, you know, we've got a lot of applications that have been around a long time that nobody's going to move for a long time, right?
That's correct, and that's one of the, when we speak with customers, that is actually very much to deal with those use cases. So there's lots of, and I agree with many of the comments that have come in. It is going to be a very much an open world where people are going to come up with new solutions. We're seeing a technology that's been around for a couple of years now, starting to become very interesting, called workspace aggregators, and that's really where you're running in an HTML5 browser, and you're getting your workspace, and some of that workspace may come from SaaS applications, some of that may come from standard HTML applications that you have internally. Some of that may come from streaming from applications, and some of that may come from a VDI being streamed into one of these workspaces. But for the end user, they don't know. This all happens behind the scenes, but because you have different ways of delivering these applications or data or resources, they all can come together in this workspace, which is like in an HTML5 browser, and then you don't really care what device you're accessing it from. It's all about your usage rights. It's all about the policies of the company. What can you do, when, and from where, and from what device. And so there's lots of new things that are happening as well. Now, one key is that around VDI, it is still going to be one of the ways that people are going to do it. It's not going to replace everything, again, but it will be an option for people to deal with these environments where there are legacy applications or legacy use cases where this just makes perfect sense.
So if any of you have questions, go ahead and hit *1, and Venetia will set up the queue. And I've got another question that came in on the chat line, and that is, you know, besides service assurance, what other kinds of CA solutions are there for VDI?
So we've also done some automation around it. So actually, both, let's take the service assurance, both MIMSoft supports this, and as well as our IM 2.2 solution supports Citrix and desktops. We've worked very closely with Citrix on sort of the whole management and monitoring. We go very deep in and get data from that environment. We've also supported provisioning of the VDI workloads. So if you go into our automation suite for cloud, that has the capability of provisioning users into VDI environments. So you go into self-service request and request that it gets approved and get an email, and now you can start accessing your VDI. And we also have support for it in our client automation solutions, which is more about some of these more advanced use cases where you have use cloning that kind of messes up some of the software deployment aspects of it. We can then go in and allow you to deploy applications in a more standard way and very, very identical between physical and virtual desktops.
Okay.
And
Venetia,
we have more on the road.
Venetia, is there anyone in the queue?
We do not have any questions from the phone line.
Okay. Well, Alan, thanks so much for doing this. I think it's a crazy world out there with a lot of stuff, moving parts, and certainly, you know, if we can find ways to help our customers, that's always a good thing. So
absolutely.
Next week,
thank you.
Next week we're going to be coming live from CA World, and so we'll have a special presentation from there. Look forward to seeing you at the same time next week. And until then, good selling.